Hi guys, today you join me in the 2022 Kia EV6, specifically the GT line model. This has been named 2022's Car of the Year, and I'm going to see today whether it deserves that title. So the EV6 is Kia's attempt at an all-electric car. There's no petrol, hybrid or diesel models you can buy in the EV6 lineup. Prices start from around £45,000 for the Air model, which includes the basics such as a heated steering wheel and heated seats, but not all of the gadgets and gizmos you might want on one of these. There are also some different drivetrain options. So you've got the rear-wheel drive model, which is what I've got here, which has around 226 horsepower, does 0 to 60 in 7.3 seconds and goes on to about 114 mile an hour. You also can get an all-wheel drive model, which has 321 horsepower, does 0 to 60 in around 5.2 seconds. Then there's the EV6 GT, which is their new flagship performance model. That one has 577 horsepower from a dual motor and a limited slip differential. The one I'm sat in here today is the GT line, which includes things like the premium seats, which are the reclining chairs, the styling pack and the dual LED adaptive headlights. This is probably the one I'd go for in the range, to be honest. It's got just the right level of equipment, although I would like to see things like the 360-degree cameras, which don't come standard in this model. Right at the top of the range is the GT Line S model, which includes a panoramic roof, 20-inch wheels, the sound system pack and the power tailgate, which I think is probably a nice option to have, but that bumps the price up to around 53 grand. I would say budget for a mid-range model if you can, which is probably going to run you about £48,000. If you really want to go to the top performance model, the EV6 GT, that one starts at around 62, but that's only if you really need that extra performance. And trust me, this thing is quick as it is. So what impressed when the EV6 first launched is the range. So it gets around 320 miles from a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery. And there is a fast charge option on these as well, which means that you can get from 10 to 80% in just 18 minutes with the highest voltage charger. I used a 7 kilowatt charger and it took around 8 hours to get to around 90%, so expect a normal charge time. But with a range of 320 miles, that's not too bad at all. If only the infrastructure was slightly better here. It was a bit of a faff getting into the app and getting signed up, but once I was in, the range of charging options is pretty decent. Performance-wise, this one packs a punch too. Even though it's only got 226 horsepower, the torque, of course, is instant, being an electric car, and it comes in really well in sport mode. I've got it in sport mode at the moment with the level 1 braking regen. So I've got a torque reading on the display, which goes from 0 to 100, which is quite fun to play with. And it really has instant response from the throttle in this mode. You can tone it down by going into the normal mode, and then it really makes things a lot more smooth. But I quite like driving it in sport because it gives you that instant power when you want it. What is really useful is the paddle system that they've installed on this. On the steering wheel, you've got the paddles up and down, and they control the regen braking system. So if I use the up paddle, it reduces that effect and makes it feel more like a normal car. So you can turn it pretty much completely off. I've been running mine on level 1, which means there is some slight braking regen, but you can't really feel it too much. As you press the down paddle, that effect increases. So you end up with 3 different levels until you get to Ipedal Mode. Now, Ipedal Mode is similar to what you'd experience on something like a Tesla, where you can operate the car pretty much just with 1 foot and it brakes for you. Now, I don't mind using that mode, but personally, I quite like having a bit more freedom like a normal car, and so I tend to use it on level 1, which gives you a little bit of regen, but not too much. The fact that you can control this on the fly with the paddles is actually really useful, I think, and a great feature. Sitting in here, you get all the usual Kia niceties that you've come to expect. So you've got 2 large displays, 12.3 inches in this car, and they tend to display all the information that you really need. So you've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and the great Kia infotainment system that is really responsive to the touch. The only complaint I have is that the sat-nav isn't particularly brilliant, but if you're going to plug your phone in, it doesn't matter anyway. And there is definitely something to be said about having physical controls as well. BMW's iDrive system, for example, or even a similar system to this, like the Genesis one, which has the rotary dial control, makes it a little bit easier to use when you're doing long journeys or if you're on the motorway or something, rather than taking your eyes off the road and touching the screen. The same can be said about the climate controls. It's got the same system as in the other new Kias, where you can switch between the climate controls and the navigation controls and the media controls using one touch button, and there's the rotary dials, which is a nice little gimmick. It looks good, and you do have some physical dials on there, but it is a bit fiddly to use on the move. I find myself resting my hand on this center console section down here, and what you find with that is you end up accidentally turning on either the heated seats or steering wheel, which can be a little bit frustrating. But talking of that center console, you've got your usual Kia rotary dial for the gear select, and you've got some camera options down there as well. This particular car doesn't have 360 cameras, but it does have a backup camera. It's nowhere near as good as those that I tested in the Sportage. You'd have to go up to the top end model for that, but definitely there are some good options for that with the Kia range. They always know how to do the cameras just right. There is also a cavernous space below because you've got no transmission tunnel, with some cup holders. You've got USB-C, USB-A, you've got a fast charge 12 outlet. You've got pretty much everything you need. And in the back, you've got a flat floor pan as well because of no transmission tunnel. And you've even got a normal 3-pin socket back there, which is really useful, with about 180 watt power delivery. My one complaint about the infotainment system in here is the position of the steering wheel. If you adjust the steering wheel down a little bit, it kind of gets in the way of the screen in front of me. And that's something that I haven't found in other Kia models. Although the steering wheel itself is okay, I'm not too much of a fan of the two sort of prong design that is in these kind of more modern cars, but you've got all of the useful controls on the steering wheel. Everything is physical buttons, which I really like, and you've also got the star buttons, which are common in Hyundai and Kias, which you can map and control to whatever you want to do, so you can use them as shortcuts. The seats themselves have loads and loads of adjustment in here, and you can get them pretty much just where you want them. I can get a really good driving position, and you can recline them and tilt them back as well, and these ones go into a full recline to lay down if you're sitting stationary. So they are really nice and adjustable, and you've got plenty of lumbar control, and you've got memory and all that good stuff as well. All of the buttons feel really purposeful, not premium I would say, but they feel like they're going to last, and they have a really nice satisfying click to them. And yeah, you can get just the position you want. A lot of the materials in here are quite interesting as well. You've got a bit of ambient lighting, and you've got this nice sweeping dash with some accents on it. A lot of the materials are sustainable, which is really nice. You've got some recycled plastic down the bottom, which looks a little bit odd, but it definitely does the trick. And these seats have a nice suede material, and all the leather and the white piping you see everywhere is all vegan. So not only do you have the recycled plastics, you also have vegan leathers. So rest assured, Daisy is still grazing in her field and was not sacrificed for your car. So yeah, as usual, top marks for Kia for all of the day-to-day living stuff. It's got everything you'd really need from it. Everything's kind of the way you expect it to be. It's definitely not as nice in here, I don't think, as the new Sportage. I prefer the interior of that, but it's not far off, and it's still quite impressive to look at. In the back, you've got plenty of space as well. Of course, you've got ISOFIX points. You've got a cavernous boot with lots of underfloor storage, which supports the use of the load cover. You can pop that in there, and it depends which model you get, how large it is. The Skoda Enyaq does have a slightly larger boot, but this one still has plenty of space and a nice opening. It's just a shame that the mid-range model doesn't get that power tailgate. But sitting in the back, there's not much space between where you rest your feet and where you're sitting, so you can feel like your knees are a bit far up at times, and that's because of where the batteries are. But to be honest, it does still feel quite spacious back there, and of course because you've got a flat floor, it does feel like you don't have to kind of squish your legs in. You've got plenty of space to spread out, and you've got outlets. You've got those USB-Cs in the seats, like in the Sportage. It's really nicely thought out back there. It is a little bit dark in this particular car. It doesn't have the pan roof, but that top end model has pan roof as standard, so that might be something to look out for if you're buying one pre-owned or if you're looking to spec one up new. Let's talk about the styling. I actually quite like the EV6. A lot of people say that it looks really cool. It's a bit different to a lot of the other cars you see on the road, and you can really tell that it's its own unique model. From the back, it looks a little bit like a Jaguar F-Pace, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And from the front, it looks fairly unique as well. I've got LED all the way around on this car, and also the sweeping indicators, which look really nice and upmarket. I really enjoy the light bar at the back. I think that looks really nice, although it would be nice to have an animation on there like in some other higher end cars. But I can't complain in this segment. I really like the mirrors as well, and of course they've got the built-in blind spot monitoring. As with most modern Kias, you've got loads and loads of safety systems in here. You've got the one button on the steering wheel, which will help you keep in lane on the motorway and do the automatic steering. You've also got the option to do the automatic highway assist with the radar guided cruise control. You've got warnings for if the blind spots have someone entering them. It'll give you haptic feedback vibration through the wheel and an audible beep, and take over the steering for you if necessary. It is all really good, but I do find it slightly unnerving at times, because you can be, if you're heading towards something really quickly, you want to dart in and out of something, sometimes the crash detection will kick in and it will give you an audible tone, a bit like what you just heard, and then it will come in with the crash protection and try auto braking for you. And that can be a little bit nerve-wracking if you're doing some high-speed driving. But overall, all of these safety systems are what you want in a family car, and that's what this is. It kind of sits in a weird segment because it's almost like a crossover size. Sitting in here, it feels like a crossover in terms of the ride height, but it actually isn't too large, even though it feels quite wide, especially because of these kind of rear arches that come out at a slight angle. So when you're looking in the mirror, you do kind of feel like it's wider at the back than at the front. And visibility out the back is relatively poor as well. Like, obviously the backup camera helps, but looking in the mirrors, I've got a massive blind spot in the back pillar. But you can kind of get away with it because the mirrors to my right and left are very large, and of course you've got some cameras to use as well, so it's not the end of the world, but just something to bear in mind because of the shape and the design of this car. Also, you've got the futuristic door handles, very similar to what you get in like an Aston Martin or a Tesla, where you have to push them in on one side to pop them out. And they are quite cool, but they can be a little bit fiddly to use one-handed. And also they tend to trap a lot of water in if it's been raining, which is somewhat annoying. You go to open the door and then your hand gets soaked. The only other thing I'm not too keen on in here is the sound system. I think that the Kia base sound systems aren't the best in the world, and there's a known issue with the DAB radio in them that reduces the sound quality, I think, which is going to be resolved by a software update. But they're not the best. You can get the higher end sound system in the top end model, which again, if you've got the budget to allow for, then great. If not, you might be left feeling a little bit disappointed by the stock sound system compared to some of its rivals. I'd definitely recommend this paint as well. It's a metallic blue and it looks very much like San Marino blue from BMW. It really pops in the sun. You've got that rich metallic flake. So it's well worth looking at if you're looking to spec one of these up. So what's this thing actually like to drive then? Well, you know me, a bit of a petrol head. Some people really just kind of despise EVs, but I'm open-minded and I think that this is actually going to be the future, so we've got to embrace it, right? So I'm coming up to a roundabout here. I'm going to give it some beans round and let's see where we get. Now, of course, you've got instant torque, so you have to be a bit careful, and the rear on this is kind of lively, actually. If you give it some beans, there we go. It tried to step out on me a little bit there, but it's quite fun to control, and it corners really flat. You've got the batteries in such a low centre of gravity in this car, and it's been designed like that. It's been designed to have a really low centre of gravity. You've got multi-link rear suspension, and it all works together quite nicely. You really feel some confidence in the bends. It's nearly 2 tons, this car, so it does feel heavy, but you never really notice that in terms of the performance when you're going around corners, because it corners so flat. It doesn't roll like a boat, like a big SUV would. It kind of just sticks really low, and it almost feels like you're defying gravity when you're going over bumps. It kind of feels a little bit harsh at first if you're not used to it, or if you're used to a really soft, damped car. I wouldn't say the damping is harsh. It's just that you sort of hit the floor very quickly, and if you kind of go over an incline or go through a bump, it just feels like you're being sucked to the floor because of how heavy the car is. And it's just part of that low centre of gravity. But what that means is that when you're in the bends and you're going for the twisty stuff, you've really got confidence in the car, which is really nice. There's also a quite even weight distribution, and I think this rear-wheel drive model is probably quite good fun when you actually get out on the twisties as well. When it comes to the all-wheel drive models, they're definitely going to get some better straight line performance and a little bit better performance in like rough weather. Although this does have a snow mode, I would probably say that the all-wheel drive one is the one to go for if you live out in the sticks. Braking doesn't feel too spongy either. You'd expect in some EVs it can feel a little bit odd because of the regen braking, but in this it feels kind of like a normal car, and I think that's why people are drawn to it. So obviously you can get the regen braking, you can do the Ipedal stuff, but overall it's really not that bad. Like, it's quite easy to adjust to, and it does feel very much like a normal car to drive. The steering is really responsive as well. There's not much texture through it, as you'd expect with a car like this with kind of progressive electric steering, but it's by no means kind of vague. It's got a real nice centre to it, and also the turning circle is really good as well, and the steering feels quite quick. It feels quite darty, and the weight and the low centre of gravity definitely helps with that as well. So I'm now on some more technical roads, giving it some beans, and it feels so flat. It's, you know, it's really got some weight to it, and you can tell that, but it does stop really well, so the brakes are definitely equipped to deal with it. I'd say definitely one of the things to keep in mind is that it's not going to feel quite as agile as like a hot hatch or something like that. But even this base model does have plenty of power. I really don't think you're going to need an all-wheel drive model or any more power unless, you know, you really want to go quick, because this does have loads of punch for you know, your day-to-day use. So I think it's better to spend your money speccing up the car to one of the higher trim levels rather than going for all-wheel drive or one of the higher power model. I think really this is more than enough for most people. Like, I think this feels quick. Obviously not at the high end in this model because of the amount of power, but yeah, it's not bad, and it corners really flat. You've got a lot of confidence in it, and it doesn't really roll around. I'm surprised the amount of weight that it can handle. The only thing that's a bit annoying is, as I say, because it's so heavy and the weight is so low down, it's almost as though every little bump you go over, you're almost forced to the floor straight away. There's no give in it. It's like really hard springs almost. But damped kind of okay. That's the slightly weird thing about it. Whoa, we got the back end out a little bit there. I've got traction on, but there is an option to turn it completely off, which would be ludicrous on the road that I'm on currently, but definitely good to have. On a road like this, it feels so quick because you can just put your foot down and get instant torque, and it will just take whatever bend you throw it at. The steering's much more responsive than I'd imagine, and it feels like a sportier drive than most of the other kind of EVs in this segment. I suppose you could compare this to a Hyundai Ioniq 5, but I'm not too much of a fan of the design of that car. I think it looks like an inflated hatchback, and I think this one probably, from what I can tell from my short impressions of both, I think this one's probably going to be the more fun, sporty drive. But I'm yet to do a full review of that car, so we shall see. When you're at the high end, the brakes do start to feel a little bit spongy, so if you're really flying, you might want to proceed with a little bit of caution because it's a lot of weight to stop. But overall, I'm really impressed with the handling capability of this car, considering how much it weighs and the size of it and that kind of thing. And I think, honestly, this one has enough power. Unless you're really caning it, I think spend your money on the trim.
Really responsive.
Way. It can feel like when you're really going quick, it can feel a little bit slow from the centre, but not worryingly so, especially as those higher trim levels will get you more luxury day-to-day features like your pan roof if you go for the top end model, and the sound system improvements, and also the larger wheels. I think the wheels on this one probably do help the damping a little bit because they're smaller, but I don't think they look right on this car. When you're at low speed as well, the turning is really light. The steering goes really light for manoeuvrability, and as I say, the turning circle's really good, so that's lovely. And then when you want to, you can just plant your foot in it, and it gives you that lovely electric torque and that nice low centre of gravity to pull you through wherever you're going. But as with all Kias, it's a great daily driver filled with loads of great tech. Yeah, there's a few little frustrations that I pointed out, but I think they're quite minor, to be honest with you, and I think you could overlook them if you were to live with this thing day to day. And of course, with Kias, you get the amazing warranty, 7 years, 100,000 miles, and with this you get additional warranties related to the battery as well. So you're going to be able to live with this as a family car for quite a decent amount of time. So if you've got a charger at home and you're considering an electric car, this one, I do understand why it got Car of the Year. So thank you so much to Kia for sending the car out to me, and hopefully I get to check out the GT in the future. And of course, there's plenty more content to come. I've got a Ford Puma hybrid in a couple of weeks' time, which is going to be my next car to review. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.